Yeah.
Okay, so we are on. We're on. Okay, so I think the first thing that I'd like to say is that, maybe one of the goals at the end of this thing is that, and as we go through this, if the file was in better condition, we probably all wouldn't be sitting here. And so that's kind of what's prompted a lot of this, is just when you go through the file the way it looks, it just starts creating more questions. So one of the things, or two of the things, is that in the participation agreement, and this will kind of set the time or the frame for what we're talking about here. Under 103B, it says all information submitted by the participant to the agency is true, correct, and complete, and is not inaccurate, incomplete, misleading, or fraudulent. The participant acknowledges that the agency is relying upon information submitted by the participant in entering into this agreement. So, we understand that you guys are relying on these applicants, these participants, and there's, you can't read their minds. So that, that is understood as looking through this as well. Also, in the agreement, you guys do have a remedy if you do discover through the process of looking at these files that the agency shall have additional remedies which are provided for pursuant to this agreement, as well as such additional remedies available at law or equity. In the event of a default by the participant, it shall be presumed that the agency or city will suffer damages not less than the amounts therefore paid by the agency of the participant pursuant to Section 202 of the agreement. So, if the participant defaults on the agreement, the city's got the ability to go back and get the $70,000. So you guys, you have a good document that outlines what the participants' responsibilities are, what your responsibilities are, and it's really, if you look at this, participant really needs to follow this, and you guys just need to make sure that the guy's following it, or people are following it. So I guess some of the big questions that came up, and I sent in the email, is that the meeting to approve this is just really vague. There's no, from Doug's request from the city, the response is back, there's no records of who was there, who voted, what was said, and we'd just like to get kind of a synopsis of the who, what, where, when, or how. I mean, were you there, or were you guys there on the 23rd? And it seems like no one's been able to just kind of clarify, yeah, we were there, this was discussed. So were you there at the meeting on the 23rd?
Paul Drury was there, and Brian Chong was there. There was another planner that was there, Sean Gibson, but he's on his honeymoon right now. So
right. And you were there too?
I was not there.
Okay. So.
And was the applicant there?
Yes. Yes.
And was the applicant's architect there?
That I don't recall off my head.
Okay. So, because the interesting thing is you look at this the meeting occurred and no one actually knows exactly what happened there. The meeting generates a letter from Brian Chong and the approval, and the meeting generates this participation agreement. So, if you make a public records request and it comes back that there's no record of this meeting and no one knows what happened there, everyone's got to try to assume what happened there. So, is there any, I guess my question would be, is the city in a position where it's going to try and recreate what happened at that meeting so we know what was discussed so you guys could actually arrive at this?
I think the short answer is no. We don't really have an intent to recreate the meeting. I think the meetings are fairly brief and to the point, because in this particular project, it had already been reviewed by the Planning Commission. So the committee usually does not look at making any more changes to the project once the Planning Commission looks at and approves the conditional use permit for the project. Now they have on occasion looked at adding a tree here, adding a landscape there, changing a light pole here, moving it over there, but those usually happen absent the Planning Commission review. So in this particular instance, I believe that the committee mainly looked at the project, looked at the cost estimate for the project itself, looked at the funding request, and made their determination. I don't mean to put words in Brian and Paul's mouth, but I'm guessing it's a fairly quick meeting.
Yes, that is correct.
Now, in terms of, I understand the CUP was done and all that, but as you review this, there's a set of guidelines as to what the CDA allows and what it doesn't allow. So, you know, if you're having this meeting, is it clear to the participant that, sure, you've got a CUP that allows all this stuff, but the guidelines only allow you certain things out of that CUP? I mean, I guess my question would be, does the Planning Commission and does the committee have the ability to change the 2006 guidelines, the Tapo Street renovation guidelines? Do you guys have the ability to say, you know, if you go down here on what's eligible and what's ineligible, so are we saying that the Planning Commission, because of their decision, overrides the Section 5 and whatever they approve on their CUP, these guidelines actually don't apply anymore, and it goes to the Planning Commission's decision? Does it go to, when you guys have your meeting, do you decide that, can you override these, I guess would be the question. How did these 2006 guidelines get amended if someone wants to do something outside of it?
The Planning Commission doesn't look at the guidelines. They don't have any role in the guidelines themselves. Yeah. They approve the project. Now, that being said, staff will have met with the applicant on many occasions prior to going to the Planning Commission, because we are working. There's the interest was in the facade renovation program, so we would counsel them as they design their project to make sure that there is sufficient things in there that can be funded through the program. So the Planning Commission never sees the guidelines. They don't look at the guidelines. They consider the project independent of them. The guidelines themselves are just that, guidelines. They're not hard and fast rules. They are set in place in order to guide staff through the process on the facade renovation program. There are interpretations that staff can make that we have done on prior projects, and there are interpretations that we have to do as we go forward in the project. I mean, there are identified eligible costs, there are identified ineligible costs. There are probably things that fall into the gray area as well, and staff will make that determination.
I guess the question would be, though, if there was an ineligible cost as a part of those guidelines, can the committee, when the committee reviews the grant process, can they just say, oh, well, even though it says ineligible on here, we're going to allow it?
No. The committee wouldn't get into that deep into the project.
Okay. That's pretty good. The other thing that I asked about in my email to you was that there's a number of checks. When the payments went out, or when the proof of payments came in, there's about 70% of the project where there's no proof of payment. There's just an invoice with a check number written on it. There's several invoices where there's no proof of payment, there's no credit card receipt, there's no check number. So it does say in the participation agreement and the guidelines that they've got to provide this proof of payment. So I guess the question is how...
David here?
Yes.
You can go, David. That's okay.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll keep you handy.
Sounds good.
We're recording it.
Okay.
I guess I'm looking at this. Here's, close to 70, maybe 75% of the project where the staff didn't verify proof of payment. Is there any ability to get these checks to verify that the payments were actually made?
We have not asked for the checks.
Okay. Can you ask for them?
You probably could.
Okay.
I wonder if, because we're going to be asking for an independent audit of this project, if that might be something the auditor would pursue.
Yeah, I mean, that would be a great
But
question.
you don't know that for sure.
Well, it would seem like they'd want to check that sort of thing. I mean, but I think the question Ted's asking is a valid question, so it seemed to me it would be the sort of thing somebody auditing the project would want to look at.
Ted, let me just interject for one, so we move to the front, and we're going kind of to the middle.
Okay.
It starts with a guidelines, and I've understood now that the guidelines are just guidelines, but the guidelines have shall provisions in them. And my understanding is you said if it's eligible and ineligible, the committee would not deviate from that. How about shall provisions? Are shall provisions in the guidelines binding on the committee?
Well, let me jump in. The committee really doesn't look at the guidelines and then look at the project and make sure it complies with the guidelines. That's a staff role.
Okay, does staff adhere to shall provisions?
Well, I mean, generally we would try and provide for the shalls are shalls and the musts are musts and the mays are mays.
In this project, were shalls shalls? Did shall stay binding?
Best as I can tell you, yes.
Okay, so let's look at the first shall, because before we get to invoices, we want to know who was paid on these invoices, because there's a fundamental question, and that is, who was the contractor on the project? Now, we have documents that are signed where the applicant signs, checks the box contractor, and signs as the contractor. We have a contractor who pulls a permit, who has his license was revoked by the state for fraud. We have a twin brother whose permit number goes on the contractor's invoice, whose license was pulled for fraud by the state, but at the home address of the contractor without a license. And then we have a fourth contractor from out of Ventura County who said he's the prime contractor at some point, but he was only paid $2,800 for the whole job. So we need to know who was the contractor on the job in this city's eyes. And when we asked that question, or Doug asked the question, or Ted, it came back with the city's business license. But the business license, I mean, there was no contractor's license, there's just a business license. So do we know who the contractor is on the project? Because it's required to have a contractor.
Yeah,
before we get to that contractor, there was a shall provision that there has to be 3 bids from licensed contractors. The city responded, we have no bids. We have no records of any bids. And before I make this sound like a negative, I want to turn it to a positive. Your public works jobs that you do with prevailing wage and audited labor costs and so forth, prove prevailing. I mean, they're as good as any city does. You have a wonderful public works projects, both through your CDA and through your public works department. For this project, when you look at it and compare it to how you handle your public works project, is horrible. There's no checks and balances. It's on the honor system. You don't know who the contractor is. There's things with licenses. There's no workers' compensation. There's no prevailing wage. In fact, the boxes are checked, no prevailing wage. And yet the state requires it to be prevailing wage. You required it. You required it in your participation agreement. It had to be prevailing wage. That's a big thing if you're doing public works projects or CDA projects without prevailing wage. And there's no audit. We have invoices, and I'm talking about invoices for tens of thousands of dollars, big invoices, where you're paying a contractor and he's signing off that it's final payment. But 2 and 3 months later, the applicant is putting in invoices for the supplies that were used to do that job. In other words, say you put up 300 feet of fence, the contractor gets paid for 300 feet of fence completed. 3 months later, you get at Home Depot invoice for 300 feet of wrought iron for the fence. Well, paint. Lots of those things. You're buying the supplies. I don't mean you. I mean the applicant is buying the supplies after the contractor, whoever he is, has been paid in full. That can't work. I mean, that doesn't pass the smell test. You know what I mean? And that's what we're finding in this job, throughout this job. And the other thing I want to add, and there's a multitude of those things, many issues of those kinds of things where we're paying cash, to on-the-book employees of K&J Auto Exchange in the San Fernando Valley, employees with no prevailing wage, with no withholding, who are then going to an ATM, who are then paying laborers, day laborers, all without taxes being taken out, all without prevailing wage, all without insurance, all without the things, workers' comp, the things that you require to do, you being the government. And you don't have it on any of your other jobs. I keep hearing, but let's look at all our jobs. They're all done like this. That's baloney. If all the jobs are like this, you shouldn't even be a city. They're not. The city's impeccable. Look, I first encountered Brian in, I think, 1986. I went to the counter for a ballot measure. He was sent out, I think he'd been working here a few weeks or 2 months. He was sent out to count my words, my 400 words, and I had 403. So we stayed for a half hour at the counter. He never flinched. He never raised his voice. He was never rude. He was professional. We talked about hyphenated words. We talked about words with apostrophes. We talked about is a particular word a word. Look, I've known him since '86. Every one of you are impeccable. The city's impeccable. This job was a job that, though it was treated on the honor system, it looks to me like you had an applicant who wasn't honorable. Things weren't done right. And it wasn't picked up, or it was picked up maybe at building and safety, or maybe at the counter when they pulled a permit, and there was always covering up, let's switch this contractor, let's switch that contractor. And in the end, a year after the job's done, the city writes a check for $70,000. But when you look at these records, they don't jive. And all we're trying to say is, in all your jobs, at the end, if an auditor comes in or someone comes in to look at these CDA funds, or a citizen comes in or a council member comes in, you have your book, you have your file, and it's impeccable. And you don't have column after column after column of responses, no record, no record, no record, no record. These are all things we should have a record. If not for this project, for the next project. Because maybe this office isn't really that staffed to handle projects and project audits like you do in public works. I don't know how the city finances work, but I know, because we do public works projects through my business, you're not allowed to do this kind of stuff. I mean, prevailing wage jobs are there. I mean, there's certifications. You required a certification at the end of the job on prevailing wage, and it wasn't. You don't have it in your file. No one ever certified there was prevailing wage paid, even at the end of the job. And that's required by law. The state even requires that, and you don't have it. So somehow, so much stuff slipped through the cracks. But I hate to go invoice by invoice at a meeting like this when we're talking about conceptual issues, but I would hope that you'd recognize these conceptual issues and going forward recognize that you need to tighten up on these conceptual issues so things like this don't slip through the cracks. And then if you do an audit on this particular job, you'll be on the same wavelength and you'll look and say, okay, we needed verification that. I mean, for example, we got invoices with whited out invoice numbers. We got invoices with whited out. I mean, there's just no sales tax on $8,000 purchase. There's just weirdness going on this job that we can't figure out.
Well,
please.
Just one quick thing. Not here to assess blame. Not here to hang anybody out to dry. But the vagueness that's been referenced with regard to the later records in the program led at least me to look backwards toward the approval meeting and the pre-project process. And when I saw what I considered to be problems in the back end, it led me to look at, maybe wrongly, at the front end of how the project started. Again, I've said it numerous times, these types of projects are good for the city, they're usually run well. Anything this city can do for business and to improve business, the whole concept of this development project, I have no complaint with. But when I looked at the back end stuff and the receipts and the problems, the apparent problems, then you start to look backwards, and maybe that was a little overkill from my perspective. So that being said, continue on. We are a group of folks here that are concerned. Mutually.
And I have not looked at everything that Ted and Doug and Barbara and Lou have looked at, because I looked at it very late, but I just quickly perused some of the information, and the first concern that I had was in the guidelines. There's a number of things that are outlined as being things that the city will provide matching funds for. But there's also a lot of things that they will not, that's excluded. And from looking at what I saw, it appears that a lot of things were thrown in and that were approved and paid for by the city that were excluded from those guidelines. And there was work that was not to be paid for that was put in the bunch that was paid for. So there's a question on my part as to what the city agreed to pay for in the guidelines, and if those were changed later by somebody, which if it was, that's fine. But we'd like to know why those changes were made, and if those changes were basically allowed on other projects, similar type projects. If we did it for this person, why did we not do it for other people? And with that, there seems to be an awful lot of work that was done that was prohibited from being paid for in those guidelines.
Yeah,
Not small items, not a can of paint, but big dollar items.
there's an interesting thing here too, is that if you take the participation agreement and you take the guidelines, these two documents actually, to me, when I read them, are protection instruments to keep what happened from happening. In the sense that, number one, the applicant here is not an owner builder, so the applicant's got to bring in they can't run the job as an owner builder because they're a tenant. Tenant does not have owner builder rights. In my public records requests, I asked for the authorizations from the owner to the participant on all matters, everything. And the city says that they don't have anything authorizing the participant to act on behalf of the owner, except for the application for the grant. So when you start looking through all the receipts and you start going through this project, these two documents keep you from getting into these problems where someone who's not a contractor and someone who's trying to act as an owner builder is trying to get reimbursements on a job. If in the guidelines it says that they should have gotten 3 competitive bids. I asked the city if they got them. I don't know if that's standard protocol for the city to see the 3 bids when you're in these meetings. Is that something you do? Do you see the 3 bids ever?
That's not something I routinely do.
Okay. So, but the idea of having the 3 bids, number one, you got prevailing wages, you've got these issues going on that are required by the state and the city, so that's why you need these 3 bids out there. Additionally, it says in these guidelines that the participant has got to give you a copy of the written contract, the signed written contract, and execute a copy to the CDA. And so the public records request comes back that you guys don't have a copy of that. So I think going back to the point is that if these guidelines where there's no records of the city doing these things, if you guys would have collected this stuff, probably would have kept the job a little bit more on track instead of someone just going off and running this as their personal project.
Well, we're being redundant, Ted, I think. Here's the sad part of it. The participation agreement, the guidelines are excellent. I mean, they reference every applicable law, labor laws, every professional law. They're excellent documents, both of them. That's the good part at the front end. At the back end, the city got the project that it wanted. They improved the corner to the level they wanted. They got it to look just like they wanted. It was built according to the plans, exactly what they wanted. So you got an excellent outcome. You got an excellent beginning. You got excellent legal documents. But in the middle, you don't have anything that passed the smell test that somebody wasn't in there scamming the system. Now, fortunately, the city only spent what it planned to spend, which was $70,000. That's good. You see a lot of places where cities get scammed, and before you know it, with, fortunately on CDA with change orders, it's different. But you don't have. I mean, maybe they wanted to spend 70, and you spend 3 times that. You can't with this kind of facade project. But that's the good news. You spend what you wanted to spend. The project turned out the way you wanted it, and all the documents were good, binding legal documents. But if you got a guy in the middle that scammed the system, let's say as example, the project cost $80,000 and you gave him 70. Well, that's not what the intent of the project was. So those are kinds of things why you avail yourself of the legal remedies and have the legal rights to ask for documentation. Except in this project, it's a void. It's just a giant void of a lack of documentation. Who's the contractor? Were invoices paid? Who were they paid to? Were they self-dealing? All that kind of stuff that you want cities to avoid getting into, and all the things that we can't find answers to protect the city in this middle of the project. But you were going to respond when I first babbled. What's your response?
I'm almost losing track of what I was going to respond to. Well, a couple things. One is in what we've determined in talking with because we obviously had to go back and kind of piece back things as they progressed. The original permit was issued to Schmidt Construction, who has an active, valid construction, but the applicant was using them as more an overseer of the project as opposed to the general contractor of the project. There is a notarized affidavit at Building and Safety that allows him, on behalf of Schmidt, allows the applicant to pull the permit on behalf of the contractor. That is allowed in state law, and he has done that. Building safety has that affidavit. It's notarized. You can take a look at it.
Brian,
Do you have a
can
copy of
Can I
that?
just interrupt for a minute? I asked for that in my public records request, and it was said it doesn't exist.
I don't know. Building safety told me it's there. So
Well, but, I mean, not, I don't.
I didn't review your public records request, so I.
No, but
I don't know.
it went, and I asked.
Okay.
For all authorizations, and it was told that it doesn't exist. So now it exists?
I'm told that the notarized authorization from Schmidt Construction for Kelly Clark to pull the permit on their behalf is there.
When did it get there?
I don't know. I just know it's there.
And if
I was
this-
told it is there.
And if if the city were to find out that that was not kosher, as Mike Judge had said at the council meeting, what would the city's position be at that point?
I honestly don't know what the ramifications are. It may be a violation of contractor law. I don't know. We'd have to look into that.
And would the city, if it was, would the city have concerns over that?
We run into violations of contractor law all the time. I think we'd probably have to assess the severity of it. It would be something we could report to the contractor's license board.
$180,000 public project?
Yeah, I don't know.
In your mind, you don't know?
I can't give you that answer right now.
Okay.
I don't know. So the permit was pulled. Schmidt Construction, under their permit, he was assigned to kind of oversee the project itself. My understanding is that he got into the project, got busy on other things, didn't quite do what he needed to do, and was relieved of his duties, and the applicant took over managing the project, hiring the other contractors, Shin Construction, under the permit number, at least that's on the invoice I received, is under the Mackel Shin, which is an active valid contractor's license. His brother Pat was working with him, and it did some of the work for Mackel for his construction company in managing that job for the applicant. So there was a transition there from Schmidt to the applicant running the job and utilizing Shin Construction to do $89,000+ worth of work on the project itself.
And and you know that they're allowed to do that as well?
Are they allowed to do that?
Yes.
My understanding from building and safety is yes.
Well, first,
Well, wait, hang on,
wait.
because if
That
you-
story has just developed in the last couple of months, first of all. But let's assume that's the true story. The Shin who has the license doesn't have a business license in the city of Simi. The Shin who doesn't have a contractor's license does have a business license. Isn't that the way it is?
It could be. I didn't check with
And the invoices that were all paid of the $89,000 went to the home address of the Shin that doesn't have a license. And the name on the invoice is the Shin's company's name that doesn't have a license, because the company that does have a contractor's license, that doesn't have a business tax receipt, that's out of the city, that claims now to be the contractor on the job, it isn't the name that's on the invoice. His company name is different. I mean, you can say you're Gabler Associates, but if your company is Michael J. Gabler and Smith Associates, you can't say you're Gabler Associates, because he may be Gabler Associates, and he may be. The names don't match. The address is wrong. The contractor's license number is right. There's no business tax, but the name of the company is the name of the company of the guy that doesn't have a contractor's license. So I know there's a story out there that we're trying to say makes sense, but in reality, there's something that doesn't pass the sniff test on the documents. You don't have any invoices from the company that has a contractor's license.
We have an invoice on an amount, and we have a check that was paid.
Yeah, but it's not the company that has a contractor's license.
You don't have a check that was paid.
And we don't have a check. You have your check.
Well, okay. So,
I mean, do we just need a
those
story, or do we
questions be answered?
But do we just need a? That's right.
Questions being
That's all we're saying.
Right.
We have a story, but somehow, you know how this stuff works. You've been in it long enough. If it doesn't look right all through this stuff, something's wrong. I mean, if you had an invoice from the Shin that has a license, it would be his company name with his contractor's license number at his business address, and you have a business license in the city. You wouldn't have it going to the home of the guy who has a revoked contractor's license with his company name, but his twin brother's license number. And these things aren't things that you see real quickly. I mean, they're not obvious to, if you're just going through stacks of paper each day, you got to audit the stuff to see how flaky it is. There's something wrong. Plus, you don't know who got paid the $89,000. Did anyone? did the Shin without a license get paid 20 and the applicant kept 60, or did the Shin with the license get paid 80 and pay the other guy as an employee? I mean, we don't know, and all we know is there's no prevailing wage in any of it because everybody's checking the box that says we have no employees.
Well, let me address prevailing wage. Prevailing wage is required on the project. We don't verify prevailing wage was paid. Similar to, I will tell you, the construction that we're doing right now here at the City Hall job. It's my job. Prevailing wage is required on the job. We don't verify prevailing wage was paid.
Well, your contract requires you to.
Actually, the state requires you.
The state requires it.
No, the state requires you to make sure that's being paid.
Okay, we require it to be paid. We don't verify that it's paid. If there is a complaint, it goes to the Department of Industrial Relations. Department of Industrial Relations contacts the property owner, or the property owner, contacts the contractor, and contracts the employee. Right. They do the investigation, and the employee and the contractor and the are responsible for making up any back wages. That's how I'm just saying, that's how we're handling the job. That's how I handle the Boys and Girls Club. That's how I handle the police department. That's how we handle our construction work jobs. It's really the responsibility of the owner to manage that.
To a point. What you're saying is very accurate to a point. But you are required to do one thing. At the end of the job, you are required to get a certification from the contractor saying that he followed prevailing wage law. And you put that in your file. And then if a question's raised, you have the right to ask for an audit of his labor fees. But you have to get a certification at the end of the job. This job, you did two things wrong. One, you don't have the certification, or at least you haven't produced it. And two, you have invoices where they've checked the boxes that said it's a non-prevailing wage job. You did provide those documents. So you accepted documents saying it's non-prevailing wage, and you never asked for the certification to show in your file that it was a prevailing wage.
It doesn't make any sense to me either. When you have guidelines,
there's a non-prevailing wage.
Sure, there is.
Okay. I'm not aware of that.
It also doesn't make any sense to me when you have guidelines that the city establishes and you don't follow through to see that those are followed on something like this. But when Lou has an article he wants taken care of, he has 3 words over, and Brian spends 2 hours counting 3 words over and over until they get it down to 400 words. But you don't follow through to check to see that the guidelines that you established for a project like this was followed. That doesn't make any sense to me.
But they do. They always do. They're impeccable. I say that word twice now. They always follow through. This is an aberration. There's something odd about this.
The invoice here from Cal State.
Well, they didn't on this one.
Right.
They've checked off every box here, new job, installation, but they did not check off that it's a prevailing wage job. No, but the point is that when you start going through, this is who someone from the city checked off that this invoice was okay. They looked at the invoice and said, hey, it's okay. And if you get into, here's the Sunbelt invoice, which they checked off and said was okay pay. No, the oversight inside the city doesn't realize that the job site address is not in Simi Valley. It's to a used car lot on Canoga. So,
point of clarification, Ted, the check marks on the corners of those pages are not from city staff.
Okay, but this was in the file that you guys prepared. Yeah, so someone looked at the Sunbelt invoice, said it's okay to deliver tools, tool rental job to 8222 Canoga, which was a used car lot at Roscoe and Canoga, but bill it to the Tapo Street project in Simi. Someone looked at this and said, well, even though prevailing wage is required and it's not checked off on here, that we shouldn't follow up on this invoice. So the point is that this is what drives everyone deeper into the file, whether these are the biggest deals in there or not. That's why I came and I said, look, the reason why we're all sitting here is you go through everything in this file, it just snowballs into something else.
There's not any one particular high point. It's the area under the curve, I think, that we're worried about.
I mean, if there was like 1 or 2 small things in the file, big deal, but it's every page you go through in here, there's problems. Just like if you look at the Shin invoices, they bill for the job complete payment by the end of February, and the materials for the job are showing up in April. I mean, there's plenty of people in the construction business here that can tell you, you don't pay your general contractor 100% of the job and then supply them with all the materials to do the job 2 months later. And that goes back to the same thing here, is that when you get into your participation agreement, in which the city's already said that you guys have no records of, is it says that the payments, let's see, where is it? Cost shall mean under, this is under 20, this should be 202, the very end of it. Cost shall mean bona fide, out-of-pocket cost properly chargeable to the participant's basis in the site, or which would so be chargeable but for proper election of the participant, payable to unrelated, unaffiliated third parties unless otherwise expressly approved in writing by the executive director at his sole discretion. I asked for the approved writing by the executive director on any payments made to people related, which would have been to the participant, and the public records request came back and said, no, we have no records. And the point of this provision in the contract is so you don't end up with this pile of invoices that creates this problem. And so, you know, I guess part of my issue here is that, you know, as the auditor goes through this stuff, they need to come back with a report and say, look, you can't, you know, the reason why you're doing this stuff is because we don't want to be in this mess. I mean, look how many orange tabs I got in here. This is just, you know, these are just highlights of the stuff that you're finding in here. So, you know, I'm concerned with the audit because are they really going to put the effort in here to connect all, I mean, there's so many dots to connect in here. You really need someone who understands this stuff.
Who is the auditor?
The auditor has not been selected yet. I'm looking at firms that have CPAs and those with redevelopment experience and knowledge. So
Right.
I have a list that I'm going to be sending a scope of work out to.
If my end desire is of any value, what I'd like to see at this point is a totally thorough and unbiased audit by somebody capable of being unbiased. One that would have some teeth in it. If there are things that result from this type of a tough audit, then that arise, that border on additional problems, then I would like to see those results being referred to whatever enforcement agency would be involved in looking after those. I'm not alleging that there are things that border on being illegal, but there obviously are things within the way the applicant conducted his side of the business that may be questionable. Our desire is to see the future of anything that's done by the city done a little cleaner than what this was. And again, not to hang anybody out to dry, but I'd like to see that independent, tough audit, and then if anything arises, I would like to see it being referred to an enforcement agency. I think there is another desire, and I'll express it, that it may end up that as a result of all this, we ask that applicant for our money back, our taxpayer money back on this, if it rises to that level.
Laura,
It wouldn't come back to the city.
Doesn't matter.
I know. I'm just putting it.
I understand.
What did you say?
It wouldn't come back to the city.
Well, it would come back to some new development fund that probably exists in Sacramento now.
Go back to County Ventura, who would distribute it out to all the taxing entities.
But you
It's
know,
the issue of the taxpayer dollar.
I think more than
Exactly.
anything, it sets an
Wherever it goes.
example.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, Brian, you know, going back to what Lewis said about the net result being, you know, what looks like a good result. You know, there's people that might say that, you know, if we could imagine anything else there, we might want something else there. But, you know, I actually walked the corner and I thought, you know, this really is a nice project at the end of the day. If there were 3 bids, then, you know, not having copies of checks would be less of a concern, because you'd say, well, you know, Acme Construction and, you know, and ABC Construction and XYZ all said that building the fence was going to cost $2,400, you know. And so, you know, and the Shin would be in some sort of parity with Acme and the XYZ. The issues that I see is there's no competitive bids, and you don't have the proof of payments. The checks that I think the city, before it really needs to get into an expensive, detailed audit, if you requested the Shin checks, there's 4. If you requested the SRD paving and asphalt, which there's just no payment method indicated on there, so you don't have any type of payment. So if presuming it's a check, and it's also a substantial amount, it's almost $8,000.
Was that subcontracted through Shin?
No.
I don't remember that being a separate.
And it's a quotation. It's a quotation where he stamped paid on it, but he didn't write a check number on it.
Okay.
Okay. It's a quotation.
Okay.
And the estimate from G.H. Schmidt for the same work.
Oh, that one, okay.
Yeah, the estimate from G.H. Schmidt for the same work was $1,500 to do the slurry seal and $900 to do the striping. And this one comes in at $77.25. There's a lack of parity. And so if you could get the Shin, the SRD, there's an oddity there's a Simi Valley glass invoice for the doors. And then if you could just get the few labor checks, then as the city, I think you guys could then start to make the decisions. Is this bigger than a bread basket? Is this something that needs further investigation? It's odd that like you said, in the story about Caloric pulling the permits on behalf of G.H. Schmidt, and G.H. Schmidt is paid on a dated weekly basis for 2 weeks of supervision, and then it ends. And then Shin is paid, and it ends February 25th as job complete. And then the job is going, obviously, out to the grand opening in May, and there's lots of procurements of the materials from the time that Shin is supposedly paid $90,000 to the point that that the grand opening takes place. So I just think that you guys would be best served going back to saying that we have a good outcome with what's on the lot, that if you just ask for the 4 checks from Shin, the SRD one to have a method and a proof of payment, and also the Simi Valley Glass one for the $6,800 doesn't show any method for payment anyways, so you need that in your file. And the labor, then you would know where you're at, and you're probably talking a net total of 10 checks at the most.
And they're so easy to get nowadays. You can just pull your statement up from the bank and get both copies.
And it would accomplish one other thing for the purpose of this discussion of who was the contractor. If it was an issue to you at that point, you'd know whether it was deposited in Michael Shin or Patrick Shin, if that was really an issue at that point. But to me, if I was in your positions and I could produce the canceled checks for the file and for yourselves, then I would feel a whole lot better about everything on the project here, because we got the outcome we wanted. It would show that you're talking Shin 90, the paving 8, and the doors 8, and the labor like 3. You're talking $115,000. You're so close to the match just with those 4 topics that you've resolved everything but these other little items that still sit in the middle.
So Laura, can we ask that prior to your investigation as far as an outside source?
Getting that information?
Because
The checks.
maybe everybody could just
Yes.
agree that it's that resolves the issue.
It's very likely it could.
Well, we can certainly do that. I guess, I hear from Doug and this concern about making sure that there is an independent view of this.
If we have to go to it, then, but
Let her finish, Doug.
I do agree, well, no, but
Yeah, let her finish.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Go ahead.
So that, that is something that's weighing heavily on me, that we want to be sure that everything that we're doing as an organization is, open, and if there are things that we need to do to improve upon, that we know what those are and we can take the steps to do that. And, staff is sort of in a position now of potentially being viewed as whatever information they bring forward, potentially being defensive of or having a particular viewpoint. And I just want to make sure that anything we do stands up to scrutiny as being a fair and objective and unbiased.
Okay, but this has been in the news. Everybody knows what's going on. And I would think Kelly Caloric would know that this is going to be coming back asking him questions. Asking him for these checks is an extremely simple request. And because he got the $70,000 from the city, I can't think of any reason why he shouldn't want to be able to say, sure, everything is above board, and here are the checks. And I think the city has a right to ask for those checks.
But I think Laura's her comment was more, if the city tries to go forward in good faith to resolve these issues and come up with a report to the council, and then they're still going to be attacked from outsiders that it's a bunch of big cover-up, you didn't get the audit, you're fake and phony, then all they did is dig a deeper hole to climb out.
They're probably going to have to. They're going to have to send it to the audit.
And I appreciate that, but I think. The problem we had was that the first report said, very very briefly, everything, every procedure and policy was followed. That's basically what came back out of the initial. And then when you go through and you see what the requirements are, you can say, well, our policy is we never ask for any documentation on 3 bids, or we never asked to document contractors' licenses, or we never asked to document prevailing. That's not going to hold water, because everyone expects you to do that. Maybe somehow the policies kind of become that, if it's because you're overworked or underfunded, or you're on a trust system, or you knew the contractor, or you have to explain why. But I think you have the capability to audit this job and say we need to make it better, and say this is what was not slipped through the cracks, or because there's nobody here that thinks the city intentionally did anything wrong, or there's any malfeasance, or anyone was getting free cars or kickbacks, or all the things that some cities have employees that do when they get in trouble. This isn't the case here. This is a job that for 20, 30 years you wanted to improve that corner. It looked like hell. Everybody would drive by it on the council and say it's an awful looking corner. Maybe you put something there that everyone didn't like. What you ended up doing was improving the corner in an area that's the gateway to this Tapo Street thing that was very important to the council and the city, because you were trying to redevelop it with good housing and good stores and good lampposts and all that, and you had this ugly monstrosity on the corner. You did a good job and you got the product. And no one got kickbacks in cars. You're not driving around with the little caloric license plates and stuff like that. But so you have the ability to do it. It's just up until now, no one's acknowledged that maybe we should have had a little more constraints on the project, or maybe we didn't notice some things, or maybe we should go back and make some requests for documentation. And if there's fraud, we're going to take whatever remedies we have available.
But I think
if that's what, and you may come back and say we still didn't do anything
wrong. If you order an audit, though, the presumption on this is that then you're really going to have to get Kelly to somehow cooperate well beyond and get distracted and well beyond just asking for 10 or less checks. If you ask for the 10 or less checks and they come back, it means he spent the $115,000 or whatever that number adds up, and it really fills the void of 90% of the middle, in my opinion. Enough that I certainly wouldn't have any issue with it. Whereas you don't even know when you start in the audit, it's gonna expend time. So I'm not saying don't proceed with an audit, but I certainly think that it's worth making the request. Hey, could we just get copies of the SHIN and the SRD and the Simi Valley glass? I believe they're there because sequentially they seem to be there, but either not getting them or by resistance, or not getting them period, or them not matching then gives you guidance to where to go from there and how much it is, because I just don't see what an auditor can really do beyond there's one check for $70,000. At least it was pretty straightforward, simple, right? I mean, there isn't much from a ledger standpoint unless you get Kelly to be overly involved in, you know, what looks like a good project.
And I think everybody at the table, not only our side of the table, but your side of the table, everybody now probably has some questions about this. And I think probably if we can resolve it so that everybody around the table here says, yeah, we've satisfied it, we've gotten the answers to all the questions, we understand what happened. And I think probably you could do that without an audit, and I don't think that you need to spend the city's money on an audit. You can just basically say that everybody that was involved in this has looked at it, and we've come to the conclusion that everything's fine. Or it's not fine, so here's the issues that we need to look at. And we can see together as a team.
I think the city too, I mean, and that's why I read this 103B, is that you guys are relying on information provided by the participant, you know, by everyone involved in the thing. So it's like I went back to the beginning, you're not mind readers, you know, this isn't Karnak and Johnny Carson. So the other thing too is when you're worried about, you know, what the outsiders are going to say or whatever, you really got to start falling back on, you've got a signed document. This is a contract. This is not, these are not, maybe we should, maybe we shouldn't. It's a signed agreement, and it's got terms, and it's got provisions and remedies. And this is your fallback where you enforce, you know, your document, and you say, look, you signed this thing, you agreed to it. It really isn't, you know, you look at this thing, it really is not a grant. Grant's actually kind of the wrong word for this money. This is a contract supposed to be between the property owner and their authorized people in the city, and it's your right, you know, to protect the public, us, in enforcing your contract. And I think that's a good thing for us. There's nothing to be ashamed of, that you guys are going back and saying, hey, here's our participation agreement. These are the concerns with it. We need to follow up and make sure that you did your part on this agreement, you know, that we set up to help you with.
And the motion for this meeting was actually sandwiched by the New Urban West, which here you're enforcing something that's unwritten, I believe, you know, was the agreement, you know, so you're going back and enforcing an agreement there, or at least attempting to, and the property owner, you know, for the property in the South Hills, you know, behind Sycamore, Lamont, you know, again, enforcing agreements. So the purpose of this meeting, I thought when I was sitting at the meeting, was you know, sort of some harbinger, in the sense that these two other discussions, you've got a contract, I just think.
And the burden on the people that we're talking about is not that great. All they have to do is just document that they followed those guidelines in that contract, and it's a done deal.
Well, I'm saying just get those canceled checks.
Yeah.
And just those top, I say just those top ones, Shin, SRD, Simi Valley Glass, and I don't even know that the labor ones are all that important, but if you guys think that you wanted them, you should ask for them.
I don't think we should be brushing any issues aside at this point. I think we should resolve this fully.
Yeah.
Well, but I think you could reassess too.
Or maybe, because a lot of times when they do an audit, they'll ask for, you know, 10 checks, and then if they think they got to dig more, they ask for the rest.
Brian, in the meetings, you know, like you said, it went really quickly. I mean, this meeting seems to be a little bit of an anomaly in the sense that there's a full business startup CUP and everything in it. And there was a memo. Who wrote the memo that day?
Lyons.
For that
Lyons.
meeting, it would have been Peter Lyons.
Yeah, Peter Lyons. And so my question was that would anybody actually take a position to say, hey, some of these things on the CUP are just not eligible either per redevelopment law or the guidelines themselves, and at least discuss that with Kelly and say, knock yourself out on all the things that are eligible, but you know, the sidewalk rebuild and the new driveway approaches might even being eligible per state law. Or, you know, and I'm just speculating. I mean, would you guys go and research some of that type of work?
The decision that was being made by the committee was the funding decision.
So just 70,000.
Correct. It was is this amount? They asked for 20 million for this.
And I think
no.
that's why I say knock yourself out on all these things. But that's why I say that maybe it didn't, just going in hindsight, if you had a similar but different type of a mechanism. You know, it might have been, you know, more, in my opinion, might have been better served to the applicant and the grantee that he was kind of at least given some guidelines, like these change orders would be important, that these items are included, these items are excluded. We don't want all your Home Depot receipts for the inside of the building. You know, just give us 67 and 67 and we're done. You know, we want a clean file. So it seems to me though that the meeting's pretty brief and just correct.
When you say it was a funding decision, we're talking about the 11/23 meeting. Mm-hmm. Is this the first time that the committee members see the project as far as a diagram of it, a layout of it? And in those cases, is that the case? Is it
from the official standpoint? Yes, that we, from the CDA staff, never presented those plans. That's one of the council members or committee members didn't go online and look at a planning commission staff report. You know, we don't know. It's not something that we would routinely ask.
But it's the first time they would have been officially presented with the project from the city. Is it?
Correct.
In that case, is it not very common that at least those people would have like we said, maybe the tree doesn't belong here, or I prefer to have a bell-shaped lighting fixture as opposed to I mean, isn't it very, very common that at the first time a group like this sees a project that there isn't some minor change, some comment, some...
Certainly in the meetings I've been in.
I'm not sure that I would say it's common, but it does happen. As Barbara would know, yeah. Taco Bell on LA Avenue.
Oh, lots of them.
Move the palm tree from here to there.
Exactly.
I want bell lights, and staff makes a mental thought, and the applicant makes his corrections. They submit the CUP to planning with those changes on there, and it moves forward.
But there were no such changes whatsoever at this meeting.
Well, you got to remember, it went to the Planning Commission first, and they probably really got into the design of it, and when it came back to this committee, they probably thought everything was fine. I'm guessing. I don't know.
That is correct.
You know? Because by now, staff knows we're looking at Tapo Street and we want bell lights, we want something that's going to really be attractive on that corner. I mean, they probably weren't as nitpicky as me, but okay, I mean, I wouldn't allow any crepe myrtles or anything.
So just out of education then, Brian, so when the first time anybody sees this part, which is the funding part, is at that meeting then?
That's not council members? Yes.
Well, no. But did staff see this proposal prior to it?
Yes. We would not schedule the meeting until we received that document.
So does anybody ever look at these from a financing standpoint and go, okay, well, $71,000 concrete work and demolition, and say, from a staff standpoint, say, can you break that out? Or how do you arrive at that number? Because the tail of the tape in reality is that Shin's bill itemizes those tasks, and they're nowhere near the $71,000. Not saying that the net sum of the project doesn't magically end up at the amount, but isn't there part of the process where if a applicant came in and had $300,000 in here, does somebody have a responsibility to say, well, that seems excessive?
Yeah, the committee, the two electeds that are in the meeting, what happens is they will show an overall plan, and then they will show the breakdown of costs.
But that's not really what. Okay, I'm sorry.
But Barbara, look, we're just trying to get educated on how the process works here. Because look, I looked at the agenda package, which has the G.H. Schmidt construction invoice. And I mean, it is weird. You see that there's, including the front of the building, they got they've got $79,000 in demolition on the project, which, you know.
Yeah, because the building's a
Yeah.
line item again.
Yeah,
here.
so you got front of the building is another 8,000. So I mean, maybe I've got too much experience with construction and the stuff we've done, but I know just looking, if I was the guy having to review this and looking at it, I'd say, what is it, why does it take almost half of this project to demo the place? And then the other thing that's interesting is that the general contractor, which has had nothing to do with this project up to this point, has added from item 20 to 28 all the CUP, RM design, architectural fees, Poller Roberts Engineering, actual cost, Penfield, Kendall, Kranzler, Gentry Surveying, JPL Zoning, City of Simi CUP actual cost. The general contractor was not involved in any of that, yet it's on his estimate to do the whole job. So I mean, part of me, and I'm not trying to blame fault on you guys, but, you know, shouldn't staff be looking at this and going, well, wait a minute, but he has nothing to do with those last 9 or 8 items. What are they doing on his invoice? To me, I would have just looked at this whole thing and I would have said, at least if I was in that meeting, I would have said, look, you guys are going to, we don't have a problem giving you the $70,000. Can you clarify where all this demo money is going? And can you tell me why work that the general contractor has nothing to do with is on his estimate for the project? Because he clearly was not involved with that. And it's more of a checks and balances on the whole thing, and not there's no like gotcha or anything. It's just like, hey, we're looking at this thing, we want to make sure it's done right. Can you explain these things?
Just to clarify on the second main question, included in the reimbursable costs are those architectural design fees, those permit fees charged by the city, and that is something that is used by the council member, the committee members, to compare numbers for numbers. So whether those numbers are the tail end of that, saying nothing of the demolition, but whether they were on a separate invoice or added to it from a second sheet of paper from someone else, the bottom line was the comparison of the numbers were to include those fees.
I agree, but I'm saying that it's this is on the contractor's stuff. It's not, he didn't hire and pay this stuff out. It shouldn't be in his proposal.
But this is just an estimate of the cost.
It's
It didn't even,
Right.
I mean, the bottom line, it didn't cost $168,000 either. So this is before I ever start the project, this is what I think the project's going to cost you.
No, I'm just saying that I would have looked at this if I was sitting on staff and said, why is unrelated stuff to this guy on his invoice? And
I
just ask
understand
that
your
question.
point, certainly.
Well, and then the other thing is if you back out the $33,000 of the architectural and CUP costs, then you arrive at a question of are you even at 50-50 match
Right.
for the construction side of it? I mean,
They have to prove
on one side, you're on one side or the other.
Right.
I don't have any problem with that. It just piqued my curiosity as to at what part of the process is it that the committee members take responsibility of deciding that this is excessive or this isn't, or we want you to do more or do less, because in your other reports you have all this great leverage. You know, we've leveraged 70% additional spend. We've leveraged 80%. We've leveraged 60%.
You know, when we're in these meetings, we do see what the cost is and what the architect or what the applicant is submitting, and we will go through it and we will say, well, you know what, you want this, we don't want to pay for that, and they'll take it off. So we do see some of it. If we think it's excessive, we would say, you know what, we don't want to do that. And I'm thinking about Tapo Street where Mission Burrito is. There was something in the back of those buildings they wanted to do, and when the committee said no. So, you know, they do look at the dollar amounts, and you know, some of them we agree with, some of them we don't.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong as long as you're at 50, right?
it's the bottom line.
It's like winning a football game, 17-13, 17-16.
As long as you're not giving points, it's okay.
Yeah.
So I guess, you know, we need to wrap this up, but I think one of the things we definitely need to do or take a look at is the checks. I think that's maybe going to help an awful lot to find out exactly where we're at. Do you think we can do that?
We can make the ask.
Is there any way, I mean, do you think he would say no?
I'll make the ask.
He's got a participation agreement. He's got a contractual agreement, and
Yeah.
it runs. Oh, here's one other question. I didn't ask this in a public information request, but when the CUP application was made for this project, does the owner have to sign on to the CUP application? The owner of the property, not the owner of the business.
There's that option for the owner to do that. The owner has to have the authorization from the owner to sign on their behalf.
Because
The applicant.
the one, and this
The
is
applicant.
this is
The
just
applicant, I'm sorry.
this
So
is
you
just
need a power of attorney or a consent?
We don't ask for that anymore, no.
Okay.
So it's just a verbal. Hey, I got approval from the owner to do this.
Yes.
Okay, so as I read the CUP, you guys have put a deed restriction on the property in that CUP that the property owner is now given up a 7-foot easement on the south property line, and they've given up a 5-foot easement to the city for a turning lane on the west property line. So, I mean, just from my real estate knowledge, a tenant with a leasehold estate cannot
That's correct.
bind that easement on that property.
The owner would have to do
Right. So
that. Would-
are the easements in that CUP even enforceable?
Well, that easements would have come later. It was a condition on the project, and Public Works would have obtained those
Yeah.
from the owner.
They're not granting these.
They would have
We have the right to ask for it.
There would have been an improvement plan,
Right.
but that would have been after the
Okay.
CUP was approved.
No, I'm just trying to understand it because I know that like one
That's
of
the
one of
procedure.
my tenant couldn't like start making that type of
No,
stuff on my property.
we
so-
don't do that.
Or demo a building, because, you know, even though it's a ugly metal shack, it's got,
Belongs to the owner.
it's got income value to it.
See, there was a tenant on there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that tenant had to move. Was not a happy tenant either.
No, but he's doing better out
Is he
of
doing-
other end of town. Yeah.
That's good. That's good to hear.
Well, I mean, I just direct to Brian because he was talking last. Do you, after the discussion, do you think there are things you can tighten up on it, or do you really feel you did it as tight as you really should do it for these kind of projects?
Hey, you know, hindsight's 20/20.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking
It's always
about.
easy to
But for the
see-
future jobs.
We're done with this project.
No, future type jobs, like the ones you're doing now for like City Hall expansion, or
I'd run the job the same way.
so you wouldn't ask for verification of prevailing wage and.
No.
How about-
It is too, this program was designed the way it is for its simplicity. Because even in the staff report went to the council in 1997, we did not have the staff to dedicate to a burdensome project. And it's right in the staff report, simplistic, easy to administer. That's the goal of this program. To verify prevailing wage, Public Works has a staff person dedicated to doing nothing but Davis-Bacon prevailing wage compliance. We don't have the staff to do that.
So, I mean, that's the answer that I thought you were going to give, and that's the reason I thought you would justify the answer, and I have total compassion for it. And you have your legal protections in your documents. You're saying even if they cheat, we're protected as a city because we can always go back after them.
We've had the DIR come after us on some of our construction projects, and we tell the contractor, provide the DIR the information that they're requesting. We give them certified payrolls that we receive, but we don't verify them. And, you know, the DIR does what they do.
But you do the certified payroll
on the job if necessary. And
you ask for certified payroll after the fact.
well, when we're talking $2, $5, $10 million project, we ask for certified payrolls.
So there's more oversight if the number's bigger. I mean, you treat this like it's a
there's
grant.
no oversight. We just receive the payroll and file it.
This is being treated like a CDA. I mean, not a CDA, like a block grant. You gave somebody $50,000, but really it's not a grant. It's because it's matching funds. So when you have matching funds, there's some implication that you're going to verify that the funds were eligible as matching funds. They met your criteria. And unfortunately, we don't go through that because it's small and we're understaffed and so forth. As example.
With CDBG grants, there are matches.
Yeah.
As example, if he submits an invoice for supply and install 130 feet of prefabricated black wrought iron fencing for $2,840, you reimburse for that. But you don't care that 3 months later is when someone else went to the store and bought the 130 feet of wrought iron fencing. So this couldn't have been installed because the material wasn't bought for 3 months later.
5 weeks.
And I guess 5 weeks. And I guess what's what's screwing around with us in the process is that they didn't submit for the $70,000 till about a year after the project's done. So by then you do have everything in, but it does, when you go through the audit novice process, lead you to believe that something was fraudulent with the invoices, because this guy couldn't have done his installation when somebody didn't buy the material till months later. So why would he submit an invoice saying it's done, and why would it be received by who's ever responsible for it?
Well, why would the contractor say supply?
Yeah.
Yeah, the contractor on the Shin estimates clearly says when the owner's supplying and when the owner's not, and many times when the owner, or the participant is not supplying the materials, you see that they went out and bought the materials 5 weeks later. So I mean, yeah, it's all just really to get into this thing, and as simple as it is, we just, or at least I expect, and maybe I'm just, maybe I'm Jimmy Stewart going to Washington asking way too much. There's a set of receipts, there's a timeline, things don't match. Why do we allow that?
And I only raise it because I hope that you have an understanding that it's really hard to fault, I don't want to say whistleblowers, investigative, inquisitive minds who are looking at this for whatever reason they decided to look at and think something doesn't look right in the paper trail. And by the same token, I hope you understand that this was never, and I only got these Thursday for the first time in my life, no matter what anyone else says, but I hope you understand that there's no implication that any of you or the city has done anything wrong. None. Whatever all we've heard from a couple of council people, this was all to destroy the city and to make it look terrible in LA and to do all these nasty. We know you didn't do anything wrong because we could see that immediately by reading your contracts and by seeing how everything played out. It's just that I think we had an applicant who didn't have a $140,000 project, which he needed, or 130, whatever it is, but the 3,000. But he didn't have it. It wasn't on the books. I mean, you had $80,000 of demolition. The ultimate bill for demolition was $8,000. So, to take down a tin building, they didn't even take the footings out. So, there was an intent to make a project have a lot of money to get $70,000, and maybe it wasn't a $140,000 project, and maybe that's something after the fact to address and see if that's true or not. Or we say we got what we wanted for the 70 grand, and let's smile and go away. And we could do that too, because we live here and we like the city and we like the city government. And I've known Brian since he was counting my words. But I think as professional people, you want to have this tighter, I would think, next time.
Well, yeah, I agree with that, Lou. I think Brian did a good description of what the intent of the program was, and that does speak to why it's perhaps not tighter. But the kinds of questions that you all have raised, I think that's why it speaks to me that there could be a value in having it audited, even though the program is done and over with. The worst thing that we would gain from this would be some lessons for future programs and projects. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I mean, I think that's helpful to us. So that's why, to me, to have another set of eyes look at this, it could be a very beneficial thing.
So after you make the ask for the checks, and hopefully you just get the checks, and hey, we got the checks. I want to look at them. It's done. Will you keep us in the loop? Whatever. I mean,
maybe we should come back together.
If that's the case. Keep us in the loop, and then if you select an auditor, I would say, will you allow us to provide the file so that they're up to speed?
Short circuit a lot of time.
Short circuit a lot of time, and then they can do what they want
the auditor to look at. Provide it to us. I mean, give us bullet points or questions.
And it's not about any gotcha or anything. It's just obviously it's been looked at, and if it can help be efficient. The last thing that I'd like to say is that when I was at the council meeting, and I've had a good relationship, I've thought, with Glenn over the years, but when he had really made it a point on the dais to do this whole common courtesy to sit down with the council, with the city staff, and have this meeting somehow right out of the box. you know, the overall, you know, my presumption, you know, moving on in my life, and Ted and I had started the Gold's Gym, you know, in our father's shopping center. We worked actively to bring in retail businesses as real estate sales people for, you know, over at Holland Groves, which is, you know, the Pier 1 and stuff over there, and the back of Target and the Albertson
Pier 1,
Center.
you're dating yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
but you know, we have our lives here. We trust that everything's going right day to day, and you know, and for whatever reason, when I saw the $70,000 publicity about the grant, it just didn't seem to me, I guess, in building some businesses, like it really necessitated $140,000 to get that lot. So it just had a little bit of curiosity. When I happened to look at some of the receipts, you know, it just raised questions. And so I don't like, you know, being cast in this light that somehow it's about overthrowing somebody, or a gotcha, or a this or a that. I mean, I know that Barbara and my father have been on opposite sides of the table. I know that Bob Huber and my father have been on opposite sides of the table.
Louis?
And Louis and my father have been on opposite sides of the table. And we've been in the city for the long term, and you know, it just raised some questions, and I really appreciated what I've heard out of the meeting. I really appreciated getting some feedback about the meeting, you know, about the meeting itself. And so, to that extent, you know, whatever everybody's sort of, you know, buzzing about what happened in the meeting or this recording, you know, I just want everybody to know that I believe that there is a right for somebody to ask questions if they're looking at it. And, you know, I've been in the city this many years that I haven't sat in this office and asked a question about anything. And I think by what you're saying that you're going to do going forward, you won't see me again asking this, because it sounds like you're looking at it the right way.
Well, the bottom line is, quite frankly, although staff sometimes loses our way, but we work for you. Mm-hmm. We work for the residents and the businesses of the community. Mm-hmm. And if there's any question about like this or anything else, we would hope that you would come to us and provide for that dialogue, because we're always willing to meet, no matter what the topic is or who it is.
Well,
we always have the open door.
I agree with that, but I think one of the things that especially got misconstrued by Glenn on the 19th is that the questions I had about this didn't arise until I made my public records request on October 29th, where I took these two documents and went side by side and said, okay, you know, I'm seeing these receipts, I'm seeing these things, but let's see how the city carried out. Did they get the contract? Did they get a copy of the executed contract? Did they do these things? So there really wasn't a point for me prior till, you know, they decided to direct this meeting to interface with you guys, because I didn't have enough information to sit down. If I would have had a discussion with you guys on these receipts, it wouldn't have worked, you know, because I really needed to understand how this thing went through, and because there was nothing in the public information request to memorialize the meeting, we need to sit down and hear from you how the thing went and understand. So there is a part, but there's a part of this that, you know, you got to do. I guess it's what you call the check-off procedure list. You make your public information request, you look through the data, you figure out what you're going to do with it. And Doug's first public information request to me was only probably about half, answered about half, or created half the questions, and then this created probably the remainder. I think the only thing that I am a little disappointed in is that I did make a public records request, and apparently there's this affidavit sitting down at the building and safety department that I was told doesn't exist, now exists. Yeah, so I'm not saying that's not your issue.
No, we can.
Whoever
follow up and get a copy.
Yeah, whoever was supposed to provide that didn't.
Or maybe, I don't know how, you know, it's specific. If your question was that specific,
it was.
Okay.
It was building and safety, everybody, and I asked for any And I'll tell you, David Caceres, he was really, did I say his name right, Caceres? He's a great guy. I mean, he called me up. He said, Ted, we're working on this stuff. We might need a couple more days. And we went kind of back and forth, and he was very accommodating and a pleasure to work with. So but like I said, there's really a lot of stuff here that I couldn't even sit with you until I got answers to those questions. So.
And Brian, just in response to what you said, my last words, you know, 'cause I come in and see you. I mean, Barbara, we were just in recently to see you and your colleagues and about bonds and finances and budgets and stuff. I mean, I think, and she can speak for herself, she got into this after the fact, after things were moving in a direction that wasn't sitting down at a table. For maybe people outside don't know there's that other process available, maybe because she wasn't available and they didn't have a council person. I don't know the issue, but I only got it Thursday. She called me and asked me to come to the meeting with her, and I think had she been in from the beginning and heard the controversy, because look, I sat with Kelly on that ad hoc fiscal advisory committee when this was going on, and he was telling me all about his problems with an electrical inspector and his problems with your city landscape architect.
I'll tell you right now, and I tell Kelly all the time, he was a major pain in the rear end to deal with.
Well, he was, and because he was so quick to scream about staff and wanting staff fired and get them off my job.
That's right.
But so we knew it then, and we knew there was a problem, and we knew that at the end everything was brought up to code. There were no shortcuts on code and stuff like that. I thought it was a closed deal. He told me it was the best deal he ever made in his life. It was fantastic. He owes his life to a council member. Blah blah blah. But in terms of this controversy that we're here today for, had she known about it early, she would have called Doug, and she would have probably dragged me along, and we'd have come in and sat down with you and your staff a long time ago. The process didn't work, or if I call it a process, because she wasn't involved until fairly recently, plus she was involved in her own political
Hoopla.
success or demise, however we look at it.
Success or demise.
But anyway, that's why I wasn't. That's why I wasn't in talking to you about it, because I was very late.
And I didn't mean any accusations, but I just, going forward, I hope you all know that we really do have an open door. You're more than welcome to come in, call, email, walk in. We're willing. Staff will meet with you at any time on any subject if that's what we do, and we're always here for you.
Just closing, I think that Tom's comment with regard to getting these checks, before we look at how in-depth some sort of an inquiry would be, or an audit, it would be perhaps a great idea, because I don't have a desire to cost the city ridiculous fees, and it's a totally another issue. But I expected Marge to deny the cell phone claim. But so encouraging causing those kinds of costs to the city is not our goal, nor is it hanging anybody out to dry. Again, when I looked at it coming from the back door forward, that's where I started to question the activities of the committee. If I hadn't seen all of the big major questions on how the project was run, I wouldn't have backed into how it was approved so much. So I hope we can resolve this, and knowing that that's the case. But I would think it would be a good idea to look at those before we decide how in-depth and how much teeth any kind of an investigation and cost.
I can certainly hold that thought until we see what these checks are and whether there's a desire or need to.
And in our conversation before, we did mention that we'd like to know. Obviously, we don't have the authority to say we want to approve whoever audits, but we'd sure like to know that they have an assurance that if it goes to that, that it'd be totally unbiased.
It's Kelly's brother, that's the
a shin.
I'd send Hamilton over to see you guys if it were my choice.
Sorry, I couldn't resist.
Okay, everybody, thank you.
Great. Thank you all.
Hopefully it's still running.
Still going.
Oh, good. All right.
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 Still going.